That was beautiful. Thank you. One of the joys that Devi and I have, because we travel around and have for many, many years now, is wherever we go, whatever country it is in, almost always people want to share music. So we've been in, for instance, in Russia, we went to Moscow, it must be nearly 20 years ago now, maybe more. We came from the airport to a center. The first thing is people wanted to sing the chants to us in Russian. The same in Croatia, the same in Mexico, everywhere. Music touches the heart in a way that words can't really connect. I mean, the best, of course, is what Swami has done, which is to combine melody and words, because that touches both the mind and the heart. The melody touches the heart. Swami has often said that in many ways the purest music comes from India, because the melody itself, just the melody alone, represents the soul's call to God. I'm talking now about a spiritual song or a chant. So the melody represents the individual's call to God and the desire for God to come back. But what we see here also is interesting, because in the West, they have also worked more on finding ways to cooperate together. And so the songs that Swami wrote, especially in the West, have four-part harmony. And so they have all the notes, when you have four-part harmony or chord, they all have to cooperate together. If you have one or more that doesn't cooperate, that's called a discord, and it sounds bad to the ears. And so he thought of music in this way, in some of the ways that he thought of people. And when he would write a longer piece of music, because four-part harmony has, the soprano, which is usually the voices that carry the melody, and then they have an alto, and they have a tenor, and they have a bass. And each of them have different kinds of roles. Well, often the bass, basically all the basses ever get to do is kind of oompa, oompa. So they sing the same thing over and over, and it's very limited. But Swami didn't like it that way. He said everybody should get to carry their own melody at some point. So he wrote a beautiful, beautiful piece of music, a fairly long one, which I think now is called Chant of the Angels. But he heard the voices. He heard that chant coming to him. But the way that he wrote that was to allow first the sopranos to do the melody part and the others support, and then the altos, and then the tenors, and then the basses, and each got to sing the melody, so that it was more like a kind of a cooperative community. He thought in those ways. Real geniuses don't see things just as things. They see them as almost like a family. Everything becomes a family. There was a great American botanist, George Washington Carver, who was really a saintly person. And after the great American Civil War, George Washington Carver helped because he really thought about nature and plants. He helped to bring the southern states of America, bring their economy back, especially with the peanut. And in fact, there's a rather fun story that he tells about himself. He said that he used to walk the woods or in nature. Every morning he would go out early in nature, and he would just try to commune with God, commune with nature. And he said, in fact, a beautiful statement, very beautiful. He said, everything will speak to you if you love it enough. And so with this open heart, he would wander through nature. And so he tells this story. He said one time he was wandering, and he said, Lord, why did you create this universe? And he heard a voice come back to him and say, George, that question is too big for you. Make it smaller. And then he said, Lord, why did you create me? And the voice came back and said, that's better, George, but it's still too big for you. Then he said, Lord, why did you create the peanut? And the voice came back and said, now you've got something you can work on. And he went and found some 150 or 200 uses for the peanut, which grew well in the poor soil of the people who were very impoverished. So it's always God will speak to us most when we're trying not to say, what about me, Lord? But I've got these needs, but what about me? But if we're trying to help somebody else, then God will use us as a channel to do that. There's a lovely story about Krishna and Arjuna who were walking together. And they came, as they were walking, they came upon a very poor Brahmin who was begging. And Arjuna's heart went out to this man. And the man told him about, that he had a very impoverished family and that he just couldn't support them. And Arjuna took a bag of golden coins and gave it to this man. And so the man went to take it home, but there had been a dacoit who was watching, and he robbed him of this bag of coins. And so the next morning, as Krishna and Arjuna were walking again, Arjuna saw this man, and he said, why are you here begging again? And the man told him the story, and Arjuna felt bad for him again. And so he had a ring with a big diamond in it. And he took that and he gave it to the poor Brahmin. And the Brahmin went, and he was crossing the river to go to his home. And he was showing the beautiful ring to everyone in the boat that he had gotten from Arjuna. And the boat rocked, and it fell out of his hand and went into the water. And so here they came the next morning, Arjuna and Krishna, and here was this poor Brahmin begging again. And so Arjuna said, well, there must be something odd in the person's karma. I don't know how I can help him anymore. And Krishna said, let me try. And so Arjuna said, yes, please. And so Krishna gave this man 2 pice. And then they walked away. And Arjuna said, how is that going to really help him? And Krishna said, just wait and see, wait and see. And so the man went back, and with 2 pice, what could he do? So he went back to cross the river again, and 2 pice, he saw, well, a fisherman had a fish there that he could get for 2 pice, and so he was going to take the fish. And since he couldn't have his own freedom, he would give the fish its freedom. And so he bought the fish to let it go. And lo and behold, out of the fish's mouth came the ring with the diamond. And so he took it and he said, look what I've found, look what I've found. And the dacoit who was in the crowd thought that he had seen him and said, oh, I'm sorry, here's your gold back, here's your gold back. Gave him the gold bag back. And so the man recovered the money and the ring that Arjuna had given. But only did that come back to him when he thought of the life of someone else. It's a beautiful story. So for all of us, one of the things, in fact, Swamiji so often told us, but one time in particular, he told us, because Devi and I were talking with him, we were basically saying, Swamiji, why does it take so long on the spiritual path to find realization? And Swamiji, he was eating breakfast, and he had a fork full of food, and he just paused with the fork midway, and he said, the whole of the spiritual path is to overcome the ego. And that is done by longer, deeper meditation and by realizing that God is the doer in everything. And then he took his bite, and that was the end of the conversation. But a whole teaching of the spiritual path in the 15 seconds or 10 seconds that it took between the pause in a bite of food and the answer. And so with that, why longer and deeper meditation? Meditation represents, and Swamiji often defined this to us. You know, we can give meditation classes and teach people the techniques of how to meditate, all of that, but he basically said that meditation is listening. That in prayer, we're often speaking to God, especially when we're praying for something that we want, praying for health, or even praying for someone else. We're speaking to God in our minds. But meditation is the stilling of the mind and stilling of the heart, so that neither our emotions nor our thoughts are disturbing the quietness. And in that quietness, we can listen. Sometimes that listening takes active form, such as listening to the sound of Om, but it's being receptive. And so meditation is being receptive to higher consciousness, our own higher consciousness, the consciousness of the Guru, the consciousness of God, who is everything, the Guru and ourselves, but we don't yet realize it. The difference between the Guru and ourselves is not one really of quality. Master would often say, God loves you just as much as he loves me, and just as much as he loves any great soul, Krishna or Jesus or anyone else. God loves everyone equally, because God is everyone equally. But the difference between a great soul and one who is striving to be great is that those souls have listened enough, long enough, and deeply enough so that they have been able to realize that only God exists. They don't really exist anymore. And also, as they do their work, no matter how vast their outward mission might be, they don't see themselves, a great soul never sees themselves as doing that. Because a great soul, remember what Swami said, the whole of the spiritual path is dissolving or getting rid of the ego. And so they've finished the spiritual path. There is no ego there to get rid of, because they have realized that ego is just your sense of separation with God. And they've realized that they don't have any separation. There's no ego. And so who's there left to act except God? Because there's nothing else. I'll just end with this. As we were driving here from Pune, we were listening to different talks, but we were listening to a talk by Master. And he was talking about the fact that he sees everything in life, saw sees. Everything in life is just a kind of a dream drama or a movie, a motion picture. And that everything comes from a beam of God's light, and then it plays on the screen in a movie theater, but for us it plays on the screen of our senses. And then we see this drama going on. But Sagar and I were talking, I had an interesting thought, and I have to meditate on it a little bit. But imagine that there were a movie that was projected, not from the projection booth, but from a distant star. And that movie took maybe a billion years, a billion light years, in order to come and reach the screen of our senses. What is that movie in the midst of that? You know, the light and dark, it's only a beam of light. It's only consciousness. And so that consciousness of God is always there coming toward us. And when we're right, and when we listen sensitively, when we're receptive, then that particular beam of God, that movie of God, will play on our consciousness. But if we're too busy, too outward, we never take the time to go into God's movie theater, which is meditation. And so longer, deeper listening and watching God's consciousness play on our consciousness, and serving, especially serving others, but realizing that God is the doer in everything. This is the way to dissolve the ego, and when that's dissolved, then we're in bliss. So I'll let Devi add some words, and then we'll take some questions. I'll take the easy ones, and she'll have the hard ones.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's a joy to see so many of our old friends and new people that have come to the Ananda Sangha in Mumbai since we've been here last. As we mentioned, maybe all of you hadn't come in yet, but for 2 weekends, one towards the end of October and then first weekend in November, we took part in 2 pilgrimages to Babaji's cave on Dronegiri Mountain, which is, if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, you know the story of Babaji manifesting a golden palace for Lahiri to receive Kriya initiation. It's a very magnetic and inspiring place. And so a number of people here today joined us on those 2 pilgrimages, and some of them had more challenges than others, but we all made it. And it was really a great, great experience. But I bring it up not just to talk about that trip, but to talk about one of the processes of spiritual growth is all of you here either have Kriya initiation, or you're in the process of receiving it, or you're studying meditation. But just to give you a little bit of advice of how to keep moving forward spiritually, because it's very, very easy, far too easy, to let the demands of our outward life, to let the world around us dull our yearning for God, dull our yearning to go deep in meditation, to make our spiritual search a high priority, if not the top priority in our life. And part of the value of going on such trips as many of us went on, there were 42 in the first group, 41 or 2 in the second group, so about 85 of us went on these 2 trips from all over India. And one of the values of such trips is that it's a time of heightened awareness. That driving to the trip itself, we all meet in Delhi at the train station, and it's kind of very early in the morning. Some people, we didn't know this, but the group from Pune, they got to the train station, and they were there quite early, like 4:15 in the morning. The train didn't leave till 6, but such were their connections. And so Dr. Aditya, who's the leader of the group in Pune, said, let's all do energization exercises. So there were about 20 of them, and they were all doing it on the platform of the train station in Delhi. And you know, there's the people sleeping on the ground and the other passengers, everyone a little bleary-eyed. But they just all started doing the energization exercises. And then people started looking at them, and people started joining in. And they said, finally, everyone on the train platform was all doing the energization exercises. But, you know, it's a long journey. You start from wherever in India you are, arriving in Delhi. Then we take the train to Kathgodam. Then you take the bus to Raniket, spend the night. Then you take another bus to Drongiri Mountain. So it takes a lot of effort to get there. But that in itself is what helps us to have a deep experience. If we could just be dropped from a helicopter on Drongiri Mountain, it wouldn't have the same impact on us because we hadn't made the effort to get there. And so the same with our spiritual life. How do we make it more dynamic to our awareness? How do we rekindle the enthusiasm that we often feel at the beginning of the spiritual path? And that's actually a very, very important thing for all of us to remember, because as the years go by, it's very easy to say, oh yes, I had Kriya, but I don't do it so regularly anymore. Or I had wanted to meditate every day, but now maybe it's a couple of times a week. And we get farther and farther away from that initial inspiration. But the good news is, it is reversible. It's not like you slowly drift into spiritual inertia. That's why having satsangs like you have with your group here in Mumbai, and watching classes online, and listening to discourses when you're driving in the car. As Jyotish mentioned, we had such a nice time listening to Master's talks, recorded talks as we were driving on the highway. You forget everything else. But the point that I'm getting to is to rekindle the initial yearning of our heart. We need heightened experiences. So I ask each of you to look at your own spiritual life, look at your sadhana, look at your practices, look at all of your devotion to the Guru, and try to build into your life one step further. So if you're meditating 15 minutes every morning, maybe you say, one morning a week, I'm going to meditate for an hour. That's all. If you do your energization exercises irregularly, say, I will do them 3 mornings a week. This is my goal. And so to really set priorities. Master was such a dynamo. That's why I love hearing his lectures, because just listening to his voice is motivating to seek God. In fact, when Master, before he came to the West in 1920, he knelt at his guru's feet, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and asked for his blessings. And Sri Yukteswar said, you have good karma. Your trip to your time in the West, your mission to the West will be a success. Everywhere you go, you will find receptive souls. And everyone that looks into your eyes, the spiritual magnetism from your eyes will change their consciousness. So I love to look at Master's picture and say, okay, Master, I'm ready. Change my consciousness with your spiritual magnetism. But for each one of us, we need to get off a spiritual treadmill where we're not making progress. We need to step off of that treadmill, evaluate and say, what can I do, even if it's one little thing, to enhance my spiritual progress? We heard a story that a friend of ours told us about was it a track coach?
No, it's the British bicycling.
Oh, the British bicycling team. And they were, there was the national team, but on a global scale, they never won any races. They were always at the bottom, very poor showings in all the races. And then a new coach came on, and he said, I want us to do everything that we're doing, look at everything that we're doing, and make it 1% better. So what is our diet like? Let's improve that 1%. What is our sleep like? Are we getting to sleep on a good hour? Let's improve that 1%. And he looked at every aspect, and he said, if we do this, I guarantee you in 5 years we will win the International Bicycling Championship. Well, that didn't happen. They won it in 1 year. But let's look at our spiritual life. If we can do 1% better, it's not that much. If we're meditating for a half hour, so then we add 3 minutes more to that. Is that 1%? 10%.
That's too big of a leap.
Okay, what's 1% of 30 minutes? 0.3. 0.3 minutes. If we're meditating a half hour, 20 seconds add. If we're, just think of that. And just try to improve 1% in everything that you're doing spiritually. It's not that hard. But we need to set challenges for ourselves. Swami Kriyananda said, and this was a little scary to me, he said, on the spiritual path, there is no treading water. You are either moving forward or you are moving backward, but you don't stay in the same place. So it's up to us. Someone asked us the question yesterday in Pune at a satsang. They said, what is the causative factor in us working out our karma? What determines if we are going to start working out our karma in this life? And we looked at him and we said, you are the causative factor. You need to decide, I want to grow spiritually. I want to move forward. As long as we're happy as we are, life is okay, maybe it's not great, but good enough, we stay as we are. But when that divine discontent starts coming in our hearts where we say, I want more of awareness than I have now. I want more joy. I want more peace. I want to feel more divine love. Then when that divine yearning begins bubbling up, then we do only 1% more. It's not that much. We can do it. Master gave us so many techniques, but he also said, and this is very encouraging, if you do 1/100th of everything I taught you, you will find God. So simplify your life so that you can give energy. Instead of getting up in the morning and checking the news, checking emails, use that time to do energization exercises. In the long run, believe me, you will be much better off. Instead of talking on the phone to friends, texting, calling, meditate. And so it's always a matter of choices. We are the ones that determine our own spiritual growth. It isn't that God favors some more than others. It's God, the Master said, and I'll close with this thought, God chooses those who choose him. And so let's make that choice more dynamic in our lives. So.
Okay, so we will be happy to try to answer some questions.
So I asked a practical question. Do you have any examples you can share where people did Kriya Yoga and that energy helped them solve problems in their own life and health and in their work and in their families.
I don't know if everyone heard the question. We'll also repeat it so that it gets on the tape. Do we have any examples of people who have practiced Kriya Yoga and that helped them practically to solve questions in their business or life or other ways? Well, we have lots and lots of examples of that. Basically, we have lived our entire adult life with people who've been practicing Kriya Yoga. And so we have seen the advantages that come. But I'll just pull from memory one that was told to us relatively recently. We have a friend and a woman who lives at Ananda, and when she was young, she had some difficulties. She had some addictions, and so she really wanted to get rid of these addictions. And she went somewhere to a talk, and she heard someone say that if you practice Kriya Yoga, it will solve all your problems. And she said, well, that's wonderful. And she wanted to learn Kriya Yoga, so she ended up connecting with Ananda, and she began practicing Kriya Yoga. And she expected that Kriya Yoga was going to solve her problems. Well, very quickly in the practice of Kriya Yoga, the addictions fell away. But she found that the addictions, in many cases, were simply covering up other problems that she had in her life, that she was kind of using the addictions as kind of medication to cover that up, and that didn't solve those problems. So she began to work, and after many, many years, she took a seclusion, and during the seclusion, she came to a deep realization. She said, I thought that the practice of Kriya Yoga was going to solve these problems for me, kind of like some magic wand. She said, it didn't do that. It did something much greater than that. It gave me the strength and mental clarity and power to begin to work on these problems and solve them myself. Master said something, I love this image. He said, the problems you have are not like a stick of dynamite that you can light and toss away and it's going to go somewhere and explode and be gone. He said, you have to transmute that energy inside your own self in order for those changes, real changes, to happen. And so how do we transmute the energy? So you're asking almost like a surface level question. How does Kriya Yoga solve the problem of how to make my business more successful? So if you do 108 Kriyas, will all of a sudden your mind realize how to solve the business problem? Well, maybe it will. But much more important is the question underneath that question. If you transform yourself and you begin to transform the karmic patterns that you have, what effect does that have on your life and on the problems that float on the surface? So it's like a lake. If the water underneath the surface is turbulent, you can never get the surface to be calm. You might get a little bit of calmness in one area for a little bit of time, but restlessness and the wavelets will return. But Kriya will begin to solve the consciousness underneath. And that solving of the consciousness underneath will do several things. One, it calms the surface so that you don't attract the same number of problems that you were attracting before. How does this work? As you calm yourself and you do not become so reactive, let's say that you're in a business situation. you calm yourself through Kriya, and you wonder, well, will Kriya fix this fellow that always bothers me at work and has a terrible temper? And lo and behold, you're doing 108 Kriyas, you go to work, and he's still a terrible fellow. So does Kriya not work? But as you do Kriya, you yourself becomes less reactive. And so the next time this terrible fellow comes and says something, instead of being reactive and fighting back, you just stay there calmly, not passively. You're calm, and you respond appropriately. So instead of reacting, you act. You have the action under your own control, and that changes the behavior of that person. So which is the better solution? To have Kriya fix one problem, or fix you, who is either the cause of the problem or is attracting the problems that come into your life? See, everything that comes to you, all those business problems and personal problems and all of that, all of those things you are attracting magnetically into your life, not to solve the problem, to solve yourself, so that you don't continue to bring those problems. So Master said, all of life is made for our entertainment and education. He said, but how few are either entertained or educated. Which reminds me of a good joke. So a mother comes in and sees that her son is sleeping, says, get up, it's late. You're going to be late for school. And the boy says, I don't want to go to school. And he pulls the head, covers up over his head. The mother says, get up, you have to go to school. And her son says, I don't want to go to school. There are 2 reasons. All the children hate me, and all the teachers, they hate me too. And the mother says to her son, get up, you still have to go to school. There are 2 reasons you have to go to school. You're 51 years old and you're the principal of the school.
I'll also offer a response to your question. You know, rather than giving personal examples of this individual and that individual, Jaya and Jyotish and I have lived all of our adult life in Ananda communities all over the world, in America, in places in Italy, in Assisi, and in India. And really, these communities are living laboratories which show the power of Kriya Yoga in daily life. Because Ananda village, for example, the first such community and the largest at this point, you know, it's been in existence it started in '69, so in 2019 we'll have our 50th anniversary. In all those years, there's never been an act of violence. There's never been crime. There's never been a sense of people looking of, how can I get rich here? How can I take advantage of the system? By the practice, and virtually everyone in these communities is a Kriyaban. And by practicing Kriya, when Swami Kriyananda said once, wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone in the world was a Kriyaban? Because everywhere you go, you would just see God smiling at you. And so these little communities, and your Ananda Sangha here in Mumbai, they're little microcosms of what the world could be. And when you share that a life lived with the enhanced by the practice of Kriya Yoga, you just find this deep level of harmony and joy and creativity and solutions and accomplishments. You know, I could give you so many examples. Some of you know in 1976, the Ananda community, Ananda village, was struck by a forest fire. And, oh, you have a little baby, that's nice. And everything was destroyed. Everything we had had built for 7 years, all the houses, all the gardens, the barns, everything. Everything was
And
burned.
our baby was younger than yours.
Yeah, our baby was 10 days old. And everything was destroyed. And yet, what happened? I mean, it would have been easy to fall into despair and helplessness and poor us and self-pity. You know, not for a minute. We just looked around and said, what do we do now? And step by step, Jaya was there, Jyotish, me, and a number of others that you may know, Sadhana Devi, of course, and their daughter was just a few years old. And we just said, what can we do now? And that's the power of having a centered, focused mind that isn't always reacting, oh, why did this happen to us, poor us, but just saying, what can we do about this? And I remember when Swami Kriyananda saw me right after, the next day after the fire, he looked at me, and I was maybe not at the height of my non-reactive process, let's put it that way. And he looked at me and he just said, how are you, Davy? Well, that's good. And he just walked away. He didn't want me to say, well, I'm not sure how I'm doing. He just affirmed. And then it was so beautiful because several weeks later, he typed a little note and sent it to us. And he said, I'm very sorry for the loss that you all sustained, but always remember what God gives, we take. And you know, we were able to live that truth. And it's through the practice of Kriya and the grace of the Guru.
So I'm going to ask an anonymous question on behalf of an anonymous person.
It's really from Sagar, but he doesn't want
Yes.
to.
The question that we have is how it can be answered anonymously.
I hope this question is not from me, but you can tell. Am I allowed to take up discipleship of the Master as I smoke regularly? And occasionally once a month I drink alcohol. And also I practice energization and meditation only 3 times in a week. Although I would like to quit both these vices, I have not yet been successful.
Which, both vices, the energization or this one?
Swamiji gave a beautiful answer to someone who asked the same question, not about both smoking and drinking, but about drinking. And this person said, I enjoy alcohol still. And she was, if not a Kriyaban, she was working toward Kriya, but I think she was a Kriyaban at the time. And so a devotee, and she said basically the same question, can I make progress even though I have this habit? And Swami gave a beautiful answer. He said, drinking alcohol is a tamasic activity. It will draw your energy down. But having said that, never let anything outside of yourself be your self-definition. Don't think of yourself even as a person who has this habit. It is just something that is there. So our self-definition is not what we do, nor any of the habits. So smoking and drinking are unhealthy habits. They're tamasic habits, and they will pull your energy down. But if you are trying to also lift your energy up through meditation and through practices of Kriya Yoga and other things, then that will lift your energy up. And eventually there will be a time when those habits fall away. There's a movie, some of you may have seen it, about Master's life, a documentary called Awake. And in that movie, there is a charming little scene where it's a man who was a very famous singer and a Hollywood actor. And he came to Master and he said to Master, all my life religion has told me, thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that, thou may not do that. I want to know what I can do. And Master said, well, do you smoke cigarettes? And the man said, yes. Master said, you may continue. The man was rather shocked. Then Master said, do you drink alcohol? Man said, yes. Master said, you may continue. And then he said, do you like the company of women? Man said, yeah, yes. Master said, you may continue. And the man was shocked. And then Master said, but I must warn you that if you take up these practices, your desire to do those things will drop away. And so the person who smokes or drinks or has any habit, don't define yourself by that habit. It's much more effective to put your energy into your spiritual life, which raises your consciousness, and then things begin to fall away, than it is to constantly say, I shall not do that, and I shall not do that, I must not do that, I must, and you just drop your energy, and then soon you go back to the old habits. So put 90% of your energy into your uplifting spiritual practices, and don't worry too much about the rest. There was a song popular in America, I don't know, and maybe in the 1940s or 1950s, was, the words were, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. So in this case, accent the positive, and the negative and the Mr. In Between, they won't want to keep company with you anymore.
So the last question I pose from this written list, at least for now, is somebody asked, what if I have found out the importance of Kriya Yoga in the later stages of my life? So what if I found out the importance of Kriya in the later stages of my life?
So essentially, is there enough time in the time left to me to use it?
What happens maybe when it's not?
Okay, well that's a good question. But you know, Master had a number of disciples that came to him. In fact, he told the story. One woman had been an atheist all her life, and then she went to a lecture that Master gave, and she was, I believe, in her 80s, but her karma was such that that was the time for her to begin a spiritual journey. And Master said in the few years that were left to her, she found God in that lifetime. And so it's not a matter of time. Some people, and I have seen this, we have seen this in our association with Ananda. Man, it's been wonderful in the sense that so many different patterns we see of different ways to be on the spiritual path, or leave the spiritual path, or leave for a little while and then continue. But it's not a matter of how long, but with what depth and sincerity. So once Master, someone said to Master, one of the monks was doing, I don't know, 1,000 kriyas a day. And Master scoffed and he said, 1,000, one should be sufficient. And so it's the depth with which we do these techniques, not the amount of time. You know, Master said, all of this delusion is based, all of our separation from God is based on the delusory fact that this world is real and that we are separate from God. He said, rub that thought away and all of this world goes away. So we just need to convince ourselves, even the prior question, am I good enough to take discipleship if I smoke or if I drink a little bit? Only you can answer that question. Is your love the fact that you smoke a cigarette? Does that mean you don't love God? I don't think so. Does the fact that you have a drink now and then mean that you don't love God? You have to answer that question. If it does, then wait till you're ready for discipleship. But we create the barriers that say, oh, it's not enough time to find God in this lifetime. If it's someone, Master said, one of Master's disciples said, just because I would say I know God doesn't mean I would find him, does it? And Master said, you've answered your own question. You said it doesn't mean I would find him. If you said with enough conviction, I want to know God and I will know him in this lifetime, there's nothing that can hold us back. So it's really, we are the ones that create our own spiritual limitations. We are the ones that separate ourselves from God. There was a famous saint of Christianity, St. Augustine, who started out life as a very worldly young man, loved to go to the taverns and carousing with his friends. In fact, many saints started that way. St. Francis was the same way. But this is the story of St. Augustine. And then he began feeling an inner change within him. But he prayed to God, make me a saint, but not yet. And so that's where most of us are. I want to grow spiritually, but I want to hedge my bets. You know, what if this world turns out to be a better place than I think it is? What if I really will find happiness by buying that new car? You know, we have to play these things out. But when we're convinced utterly and absolutely, then we don't hedge our bets anymore. Then we say, okay, God, let's go. I'm ready now. And so it doesn't matter the time we have left. It's the intensity of our love for God and our longing for God that brings us near to him.
How do you define spiritual success?
How do you define spiritual success? That's a good question. I would say by increasing joy, increasing calmness, peace, the ability to love people more deeply. Someone was just telling us Sagar was telling us a beautiful example of a man named Larry Brilliant, who was CEO
of the philanthropic arm of Google.
Philanthropic arm of Google. And he was a disciple of Nimkrili Baba. And he said that he would go and sit by the side of Nimkrili Baba, and he would realize that Nimkrili Baba loved everyone. He just constantly was giving love. And he said, that seemed like something that should be. After all, Nimkrili Baba was a saint. He said, but the real miracle was that when I sat by his side, I loved everyone. I wanted to constantly give love. And so that, I would say, is a sign of spiritual success, is that there's an increasing desire to turn your mind toward God and also to just serve as a channel of love and kindness and goodness and dharma in the world. And along with that comes great freedom of thought. So that's the way I would define spiritual success. Miracles or powers? No.
Speaking of that, I'll share a wonderful statement made by Nayaswamis Jyotish, who's sitting up here next to Sagar. He was giving a lecture somewhere in India, I'm not sure where it was, on meditation. And someone said to him, well, you've been meditating, someone in the audience asked the question, you've been meditating all these years. Have you developed any powers? And Jaya, if you know him, the answer is quintessential Jaya. He said, no, I can't say that I have any powers. And then he paused and he said, well, I have one. I have the power to choose to be happy or not. But I don't always use that power. But that's another sign of spiritual success. no matter what happens, to find an underlying joy. When we saw this in Swami Kriyananda's life so often, we were with him in many trying times of his life, when he was having surgery or health problems. And I remember once we called him, he was in Pune, and his kidneys stopped functioning. This was a few years before he died, and they had to hook him up to it. We were in America. We had to hook him up to a dialysis machine, and we called up the hospital to see if we could get some information. And one of our friends said, "Oh, I'm in the room with Swami. Do you want to talk with him?" We didn't know we could talk with him even. And so he said, "Oh, hello, how are you?" And he said, "Everyone tells me I look like a plate of spaghetti because I have so many tubes coming out of me everywhere." And he was laughing, and we laughed. And, you know, the ability to just to feel joy without any reason, just because that's the presence of God in our life, is that kind of joy. So to be happy under all circumstances, to express joy to others, to think of others' needs first, to forget yourself in the contemplation of God's presence, of God's goodness, of God's truth. Most of all, I think, to have simplicity of heart and purity of mind, so that in everything you see God's presence, in everyone you see their highest potential, not to judge others. That's so important. Everyone's doing the best they can. Some years ago, someone wrote to Jyotish and me a very, very critical letter, just telling us everything we were doing wrong, and, you know, a pretty good letter, I must say. They were good. They hit a lot of targets. And Swami was having a satsang at his house, and we were going down. We had just read the letter, and we said to each other, let's not say anything to anybody. Just let's go and enjoy the satsang. So we went down there and to Swami's home. This was at Ananda village. And he looked at us instantly. He said, "What's wrong?" He said, "Come, talk with me." And we went into a little side room, and we told him what had happened. He kind of drew it out of us. And we said, "Swamiji, is what this person wrote, is it true?" And Swami just said, "You're doing the best you can for who you are." And I wanted a little more than that. So I said, "Well, was that person wrong to write us such a letter that was so critical and caustic?" And he paused and he said, "They're doing the best they can for who they are." And then he got a little smile on his face and he said, "And I'm doing the best I can for who I am." And so he said, just let it go. Don't judge. Just see that everyone is doing the best they can. And just in that little few minutes, he healed us of the hurt and the self-doubt, and went back and gave a lovely satsang. So this also is a sign of spiritual success. Not to take things personally, not to take offense. My goodness, we could spend our whole life nurturing our grudges and thinking how people have not acted properly towards us. What a waste of time. Just be happy in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How can we overcome mental laziness?
Mental
Laziness, especially other than doing the mundane things, if you do something intellectual and apply your mind, you try to skip those things.
How to overcome mental laziness. Master, I'll give a couple of things from Master and then a couple of things from my own experience. Master said that, among other things, we should look at our mental diet. And so we should read a little bit of humor every day. We should read a little bit of something that will help us understand the world every day. We should read a little bit of science or something like that every day. Then he also said that if you read 1 hour think 2 hours. If you think 2 hours, meditate 3 hours. Pardon?
Write 3 hours.
Write 3 hours. And if you write 3 hours, meditate all the time. So you just have to build in some little habits. And it would be good to take up something that forces you to use your mind, but that you enjoy. So maybe it's even to start with doing a little puzzle, a crossword puzzle or something, but something where you have to concentrate. Another thing that we've found helpful, and this would be good for overcoming mental laziness, is sometimes we won't put out an effort because we're afraid that it is going to take too much effort. So get a little kitchen timer and say, okay, I'm going to, whatever it is that requires mental effort, set the timer for 15 minutes and say, okay, I'm going to really concentrate during this 15 minutes. Not going to text, I'm not going to answer emails, I'm not going to just daydream, I'm going to really concentrate just for that 15 minutes. And that slowly trains you to put out the effort.
You know, often the problem really isn't mental laziness, it's scattered energy. And the world we live in today is almost designed to keep our minds distracted in multiple areas. So that's where the practice of meditation is so valuable. So when you practice the Hong Sau technique, and everyone here has it, try to do it for a shorter period of time, but without your mind. Really try to keep your mind focused for 15 minutes, whatever period. Some years ago, a group of young people at Ananda Village did this experiment. They were doing the Hong Sau technique together, and they said, every time your mind wanders in the group, chant Om out loud. And they said, I wasn't there, but my friend told me, and it was Om, 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 Om. And so they moved into the Om technique from that. But so start. The Hong Sau technique, Master calls it a technique of concentration. So if you can learn to concentrate your mind, then you'll find it's easier to focus it on a challenging task. But when you're thinking of a million different things, you know, that's the disadvantage of internet and so forth. You can get so distracted that you don't really concentrate on what you need to do. So practice Hong Sau with the goal in mind to deepen your concentration. And then, as Jyotish was saying, whatever it is, if you have a problem to solve, something to write, whatever it might be, an assignment from work or school or whatever, just say, okay, for this 15 minutes, this half hour, I will utterly concentrate on this. And you'll find that you can break through mental laziness.
I'll just add one simple thing. Train yourself to do one thing at a time, because that's just a habit to do multiple things. But we would see Swami, he had intense concentration. I remember many times, but just a good visual image. He would be, one of the ways that he wrote is that he would write on a computer, and then he would print those pages up, and then he would take them in a printed form and he would edit. He said he could edit better on paper than he could on a screen. And so he would be editing, and when he was editing, he was laser focused on that. And I remember many times, but one time sticks in my mind, his secretary, Lakshman, came in with some letters, and you could see that Lakshman was trying to get Swami's attention so that he could get on with his work and have Swami look at his letters. And Swami glanced up like that, gave him about a half a second of attention just to let Lakshman know that he saw him in the room, so Lakshman wouldn't continue to clear his throat or whatever he would to get Swami's attention. And then he went absolutely back to his task. And he went through, he had about 5 pages left, took him maybe 10 or 15 minutes till he finished that, gathered his papers, put them down, and looked at Lakshman and said, "And what have you for me?" and gave complete attention to Lakshman. So do one thing at a time and do it with all your mind, and that will help you. And it's just a habit to allow yourself to be scattered. You know, it's one thing to have laser-like focus in Hong Sa. The mind is hard to control, but you can control what you're doing quite easily. So that's a good habit to develop.
Tell the story about Swami question, Hong Sa, Soham, and Swami Narayan.
Okay, Swami Devi says, tell the story. Okay, so Swami was absolutely loyal to Master. Just, you know, he if Master said something, then he just absolutely accepted that. And why not? Master was always right. But so one time, Swami, after Master's passing, was in India, and he went to someone, and this person asked him what some of the practices of Ananda were. And Swami told him, and among others, he said, we practice a technique of watching the breath called Hong Sa. And this person, who was a very well-known teacher, and I'm not going to say his name, said, oh, that's wrong. The mantra should be Soham. So you're doing it wrong. Your guru taught you wrong. And Swami and this man said, and you know, the scriptures don't support Hong Sa, only Soham. And Swami didn't know the scriptures well enough to be able to refute that, but he was not going to let it go. So we were told by a friend whose guru was Narayan Swami. And so Swami traveled from where he was, and he got off the plane, and he called his friend, and he said, you have to take me to Swami Narayan, because Narayan Swami had a huge library and an absolutely photographic memory, and he was reputed to be one of the wisest in all of India in knowledge of the scriptures. He said, you must take me. I'm not even going to get out of the cab until you take me to see him, because I have to ask him this question. So Swami was just kind of laser-like with that. And so they persuaded Swami at least to get out of the cab and to come in and drop his bags. And then they went to Narayan Swami. And Swami got out and he said, there's a question. I've just got to ask your knowledge, your advice on this. And Narayan Swami said, you can ask your question, but first let's take some food. And so they, you know, he wanted Swami to calm down and be in a receptive mood more. And so then they had food made and took some food. And then Narayan Swami said, and what is your question? And Swami said, you know, my guru taught this technique as Hong Sa, and this other said that it could only be Soham, and I need to know what the scriptural answer to this is. And Swami Narayan had an assistant, and he said, go and get that book on the top shelf, the fourth one from the left, and go to page thousands of books, and go to page 175 and read the third paragraph. And so the assistant, I don't know that was exactly it, but you know, get the idea. So the assistant did that, and it said that the more ancient tradition was Hong Sa. And so with that, but there was also the other tradition of Soham. So, but Swami then got the scriptural support, so that intuitively he knew that Master was correct. but he wanted to be able to also be able to support that in case he were ever asked that question by someone else. But it's just an example of when Swami fixed his mind on something, nothing deterred him until he was able to achieve that. We're giving very long answers to questions. So I'll answer the next three. Yes, no, and no.
Why this is called as a Kriya Yoga? What is the exact Kriya part of this complete process?
Why is it Kriya Yoga? First of all, because that's what Babaji called it, as he gave it. But Kriya is a very interesting term. It means action. And so Kriya it's just a word meaning action. But there are two. That's Davies. Now, but there are two words that connote action. They're both from the same root. And one is karma, and that's action which is binding. And kriya is action which is not binding or unbinds. And so it's a term for an activity that we do that frees us from karma. And in fact, one of the results of kriya is that as we do the kriya technique, it brings the seeds of karma from the subtle spine and burns them up in the fire of the spiritual eye. And so that's it.
Energization, exercise, and meditation both combined is Kriya.
No. Kriya is a specific technique in meditation, and it's a specific kind of a pranayama.
It's the highest technique that Master's lineage brought. And our teacher, Swami Kriyananda, I don't know if I see no picture. Oh, here. Okay. So Swami Kriyananda chose that as his monastic name, and it means both joy through the practice of kriya and joy through service, joy through action. So it has both meanings.
But used generally, it means this specific technique that comes down from Babaji and is taught to people who want to learn that technique.
You know, one of the devotees had a question that he's in his 50s and he knows that to keep progressing with Kriya, in his next life he has to be a human, and he's sort of wondering what the probability is that in future lives he'll get a human body so he can practice Kriya if need be in the next life also.
Well,
he's afraid he won't have a human birth? Well, what is he doing?
I would say the probability, if he is a human doing Kriya in this lifetime, the probability is greater that he won't be a human in his next life because he won't have a next life. Yeah, then that he will revert back to the animal level. But to answer it more seriously, Master said that it is that basically we always progress. We may take a long, long time in the human level, but we rarely go back into an animal level. And he said that when that happens, we normally would only go to one lifetime, and it's extremely, agitating, because we know when we're in, let's say we go back into the body of a dog, a pet dog. We know that we should be something more than that, but we're stuck in that body. He said only very, very rarely do people have to go back farther than that, and that's if they continue repeatedly to consciously choose to do evil acts.
But, you know, he may be, whoever this anonymous person is, he may be thinking more of like the Buddhist tradition, where Buddha talked about many lives, where he was a, you know, a baby cow or, you know, a goat, and what he learned. There's that lovely book called Jataka Tales, you know, of all the lives of Buddha and what he learned from each of those lives. But I think that's more, honestly, allegorical than really talking about the progression of the soul spiritually. So once you have the good karma to receive Kriya initiation, even if you go away from it for a life or two, you know, that's the question that Arjuna asks Krishna in the Gita. Well, what if I practice these techniques, but I don't achieve the goal? Have I lost what I've accomplished in this life? And Arjuna is reassured by Krishna. Krishna says, no effort is ever lost. You will be born in the next life in the family of perhaps enlightened yogis or people that are supportive of your spiritual quest, and you will pick up where you left off. And I honestly think people who come to Master's path, this is not an easy path. It's not a quick, let's use the English slang, it's not a feel-good kind of path. It's a path of dedication and hard work and self-discipline. So I think those of us who have received Kriya in this life and who are disciples of Master, we've been on the spiritual path for many lifetimes to bring us to this point.
I think if we could really see the veil between one life and the next, it would be very little change happens from your last life to this life. You pick up very much. Your body looks more or less like your body did at that time because the mental habits are much the same. So it's closer to what is the change between one day of school and the next day of school than it is from, you know, so your child is not likely to go to school and come back in the form of a monkey. It may seem like they're acting like one, but that's different.
We haven't had any questions from this sector.
Yes.
You have to hold your part up.
To overcome deep-seated attachments.
Deep-seated attachments? How to overcome? First of all, don't be too hard on yourself. There's a beautiful quote from Master where he says, God doesn't care about your faults. He cares about your indifference. So if we can start by just accepting that we are a sincere person, that we have things to overcome, but with the grace of God and Guru, we can overcome these things. I remember some years ago I was having a problem. I was being very reactive to a certain person, and I didn't like it. I didn't like to have a negative reaction. And I was trying everything I could and just praying for the person, doing affirmations. And finally, I didn't feel like I was making much progress. So I went to Swami and I said, Swamiji, what can I do? And he laughed and he said, don't worry. The deep changes are really God's grace when those happen. So love God. Do your practices, try to attune yourself to Master, look into his eyes, draw his spiritual magnetism, and then just say, I offer this up to you. I offer it to God. And every night, Swami told us this, visualize your heart as like a golden globe of light, and any strings of attachments or whatever it may be, negative reactions, just feel like you're taking a little scissors and cutting those strings until your heart is just a globe of light, free from any restrictions. But the most important thing is, as we were saying earlier about the habits of smoking or so forth, don't identify with these things. Don't say, I am this. Just say, I have not yet overcome this, but I am moving towards it. And the more we can keep believing that, Swami said, even if you have poor health, Even if you're on your deathbed, if you say, I am well, he said in your next lifetime, that strong thought will bring you into a body that does have good health. So just affirm, with the grace of God and Guru, I will be free of this, and just keep putting one step in front of the other.
Also, don't hide your attachments from God. Share them with Him. One time, Swamiji, there was a man at Ananda who loved ice cream. Now, this is a minor attachment, so it's not such a big thing. But he felt guilty about his love for ice cream. And Swami just laughed. He said, eat the ice cream thinking that you're sharing it with Master. And so if you have an attachment, just share it with God. Even say, God, I'm really attached to this person or this situation or whatever. And so, as long as you're attached, then share it with God. He's sharing it in any case. But it's our thought that we have to hide something from God that keeps Him out of the picture. So, if you're attached, just share it with God. And gradually, as that karmic intensity decreases, the attachment will decrease and fall away.
You tell the story of how he got over the attachment to ice cream.
Oh, this man finally, he said, I'm going to get over this attachment to ice cream. And he got a huge gallon of ice cream and forced himself to eat it. And he was so sick of ice cream, he never wanted it again.
We don't necessarily...
Yeah, we don't. No, this is...
As they say, do not practice this at home.
As Kriyavans, we are like looking to level life, attunement to God, our goals, through our goals. So, like considering our practice regular and we are to change in our lives, how can we make sure that what I'm doing on day-to-day basis, it's not necessarily my actions or anything, but my feelings, my thoughts, are probably an agreement to at least Guru? Are there any examples of your experience?
You know, all we can do is do the best we can. You know, there's the teaching we should constantly be thinking of God. Well, I certainly don't constantly, consciously think of God. And then sometimes I feel a little guilty. Oh, I haven't been thinking of you. And so I come back. But just try to do what you can. There are certain habits that you can train yourself in that are very helpful. So when you have a problem, try to think, Master, help me with this problem. And that will attune your consciousness. Master said, one of the highest prayers is, I will reason, I will act, but guide thou my thought, my reason, will, and activity to the right thing in every path. And so, translating that, we have to go ahead and do things and make decisions. But it's the forgetting to try to ask God to help us with that. So just try the best you can and train yourself in habits to remember God as much as you can. The more you do that, the more powerful it becomes. A practice that I personally have found very helpful is to take a chant, and in this case, one that attunes me to Master, and chant that chant over and over and over again until it goes into the subconscious. And then it will spontaneously arise in my mind very often, even if I do it as a practice for, a week or two at a time, where I take one chant and do it over and over again, it goes into the subconscious. So if I wake at night, that chant is going on in my mind. And so just take something that from your heart attunes you to Master, and drive it into the subconscious, and then it will rise into the superconscious with you.
And, just as we were saying earlier, try to do 1% better than you're doing. Sometimes the spiritual path and the teachings and the right attitudes and the techniques, it just seems like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed by everything that's being presented to me that I need to do. But if we can just, when you wake up in the morning, try to meditate every day, try to leave the house with the thought of God, say, help me to remember you this day. Because even truly, the ability to think about God is His grace. It's not something we do by our own mental powers. And so and then, throughout the day, maybe take a little break at your lunch, maybe before you eat lunch. Just maybe go and, if you have Kriya Yoga technique, maybe do a few Kriyas or just meditate a little bit and then have your lunch. Then when you come home, just say, okay, now I'm home and I've entered, this vibration. I don't have to be out in the world anymore. And then just try to remember Him. And then before you go to sleep, just the last thoughts, try to say, good night, God. And if Master said, the minutes are more important than the hours, and the hours are more important than the days, and on, the days are more important than the years. So 1 minute each day with a loving, concentrated thought of God, and we do this day after day, it's like channeling the water of a river. Little by little, it flows in the right course to the source of our happiness, which is God.
Do you commute to work?
Commute. I'm a professional, so it's not I have a job. Day-to-day work.
Well, people in this room, if we added up the hours total that you spend in your car each day, it would be a huge number. Well, why don't you get the talks of Yogananda and Kriyananda and throw away all the other music and all the other things and just listen to that when you're in your car. That alone will have Master with you or Swami with you maybe for several hours a week. Or you can choose to have whatever dead metalhead sitting in your car and going into your mind instead. Make a choice, Master or dead metalhead,
So, maybe I'll end with this anonymous question. In India, as you know, after marriage, generally people live in joint households. And so one of our devotees recently got married. And he sees some expectations that his the spouse, his wife and his in-laws, there's some, his parents, her in-laws, have some kinds of expectations between each other. I couldn't understand from the question who was on the right side, but those expectations cause some dissent. And this guy doesn't want, to be involved, either by saying, okay, this is right or this is wrong, because then he gets pulled into the dissent, and he's just trying to see what is his right role in between sort of two warring factions where he's not directly involved, but he's affected. Complicated question.
So this isn't the story of the Kauravas and the Pandavas, I hope. No. I believe it was Swami Kriyanandaji who said, the presence of a man of peace, even if he speaks no words, creates more harmony than all the negotiating and the discussion. So tell our anonymous friend that try to have a meditative life. Try to feel God's peace and God's harmony within you, and that your presence in the household will help to create harmony all around you. And I have seen this very often. You just, someone with a deep sense of peace or love, they can go anywhere. And the animosity, the tension between people falls away. There's a beautiful book about the life of Buddha called The Light of Asia. And it said, in that moment when Buddha achieved enlightenment, all throughout the kingdom of India, a husband had been arguing with his wife, and all of a sudden they smiled and found harmony. A business person was cheating his colleague, and he realized that wasn't the right thing to do. So our consciousness affects everyone in our lives. And the best thing we can do, we don't have to be an arbiter or a negotiator, but try to live in peace and harmony, and that will heal the discord all around you.
This is a variation on a joke that usually has a different subject, but I'll tell it with the in-laws for this one. So a man is praying to God. He has to travel to Sri Lanka. He's praying to God, it's so expensive to fly. Why don't you build me a highway between the mainland and Sri Lanka, and so that I can drive? It'll be much less expensive for me. And God answers, you have no idea how difficult that would be. It would be require the substructure and all the permits and all of the things, the difficulty of doing that. It's enormous. And the man says, well, I understand. Well then, God, tell me how to create peace between my in-laws. And God says, do you want that highway to be 2 lanes or 4 lanes?